Outlet mall.
Outlet mall.
Outlet store. Outlet store. Outlet village. Outlet village.
Outlier. Outlier. In the set, 3, 5, 4, 6, 2, 25, 5, 6. 25 is an outlier.
Outline.
Outline.
A research proposal outline.
An outline of world history.
A broad outline of the committee's plans.
A debt reduction scheme was agreed in outline. The outlines of animals were cut into the rock.
An outline map of Europe.
Figures drawn in outline.
Always write an outline for your essays.
The new president outlined plans to deal with crime, drugs and education. The new president outlined plans to deal with crime, drugs and education.
A map with our property outlined in red.
Trees outlined against the sky.
Outlive.
Outlive.
She outlived her husband by 20 years.
Good books have a way of outliving those who want to ban them. Good books have a way of outliving those who want to ban them.
The docks have outlived their usefulness.
Outlook.
Outlook.
He's got a good outlook on life.
Exercise will improve your looks and your outlook. She still has an optimistic outlook for the future. The outlook for the weekend is unsettled with periods of heavy rain.
The outlook for sufferers from this disease is bleak. The outlook for sufferers from this disease is bleak.
A gloomy economic outlook in Western Europe.
A very pleasing outlook from the bedroom window.
Outlying.
Outlying.
One of the outlying suburbs.
Outmaneuver.
Outmaneuver.
He believed he could outmaneuver and trap the English king. Outmoded.
Outmoded.
Outmoded ideas.
Outnumber.
Outnumber.
Flats outnumber houses in this area.
His troops were hopelessly outnumbered.
In nursing, women still outnumber men by 4 to 1.
Men in prison vastly outnumber women.
Out-of-body experience.
Out-of-body experience.
Out-of-court settlement.
Out-of-court settlement.
Out of date.
Out of date.
The information in the tourist guide is already out of date.
Their manufacturing methods are hopelessly out of date.
An out-of-date passport.
Out of doors.
Out of doors.
The kids spent all their time out of doors.
Out-of-pocket expenses. Out-of-pocket expenses.
Out of state.
Out of state.
An out-of-state driver's license.
Out of the way.
Out of the way.
An out-of-the-way spot for a picnic.
It's a great little pub, but a bit out of the way.
Her taste in music is a bit out of the way.
Out of town.
Out of town.
Out-of-town visitors.
Out of town shopping centres.
Out of work.
Out-of-work actors. He's been out of work for 6 months.
Outpace.
Outpace.
Job openings were outpacing the supply of qualified workers. Job openings were outpacing the supply of qualified workers.
Outpatient.
Outpatient.
An outpatient clinic.
A routine examination in outpatients.
Outperform.
Outperform.
Stocks generally outperform other investments.
Outplacement.
Outplacement.
Outplay.
Outplay.
Outpoint. Outpoint.
Outpost.
Outpost.
A remote outpost of the empire.
Outpouring.
Outpouring.
An outpouring of grief.
An outpouring of creative energy.
Output.
Output.
Output is up 30% on last year. Korea's agricultural output. The world's output of carbon dioxide.
Outrage.
Outrage.
The response to the jury's verdict was one of outrage.
A sense of moral outrage.
Environmentalists outrage at plans to develop the coastline. Environmentalists outrage at plans to develop the coastline.
The case generated public outrage. The case generated public outrage.
Bomb outrages in London.
This is an outrage.
Customers were outraged by the price increases. Customers were outraged by the price increases.
Outrageous.
Outrageous.
Outrageous prices.
An outrageous attack on his policies.
It's outrageous that the poor should pay such high taxes.
An outrageous hairstyle.
He says the most outrageous things.
Outran.
Outran.
Outrank.
Outrank.
Outre.
Outre.
Outreach.
Outreach.
Outreach centres for drug addicts.
Outride.
Outride.
Outrider.
Outrider.
Outrigger.
Outrigger.
Outright.
Outright.
An outright refusal.
An outright attack on his actions.
An outright victory.
An outright ban on the sale of tobacco.
If she asked me outright, I'd tell her.
She won outright.
They rejected the deal outright.
The passenger was killed outright.
They fired her outright.
Outrode.
Outrode.
Outrun.
Outrun.
The company's spending was outrunning its income.
Outsell.
Outsell.
It may outsell his previous novels.
Australia now outsells the US in wines.
Outset.
Outset.
It was clear from the outset that there were going to be problems.
It's better to get something in writing right at the outset.
A person with higher qualifications can get a better paid job at the outset of their career.
Outshine.
Outshine.
Several new players outshone the veterans.
Outside.
Outside.
When we got up, it was still dark outside. Go and play outside. Could you wait outside, please?
I'll meet you outside the theatre at 2 o'clock.
Several people were standing in the hallway outside of his room.
We went outside to see what was happening. I opened the door and looked outside.
She often travels outside the UK.
We camped a few miles outside the town.
Bolton is a mill town just outside Manchester.
Maritza, 19, lives in Everett, outside of Boston.
It's outside my experience, I'm afraid.
Children born outside of marriage. Few people outside the government realized what was happening.
The university administrators ignored criticism from outside.
Management consultants were brought in from outside the company.
Outside of love, the best thing you can give a child is attention.
I'm taking one big trip this summer, but outside of that, I'll be around.
He finished in 10 minutes 22.4 seconds, 4 seconds outside the record.
We turned off the outside lights and went to bed.
The house will need a lot of outside repairs before we can sell it.
Outside observers said the election was free and fair.
Consultants were brought in to provide some outside advice.
The city is largely cut off from the outside world. Computers linked by modems to the outside world.
Children should be encouraged to take up outside interests, such as music or sport. Children should be encouraged to take up outside interests, such as music or sport.
Ireland still have an outside chance of winning.
Dial 9 before the number when making outside calls. Dial 9 before the number when making outside calls.
The outside of the house was painted white. From the outside, it looked like any other big warehouse.
Influences from the outside can undermine the values you want to teach your children.
To anyone on the outside, our marriage seemed perfect.
Ken was furious, but forced himself to appear calm on the outside.
Life on the outside was not as easy as he'd first thought.
It's only a 20-minute walk, half an hour at the outside.
Outsider.
Outsider.
I'm an outsider, the only foreign woman in the group.
To an outsider, the system seems complex and confusing.
A political outsider who is running for governor.
Last year he was a rank outsider for the title.
Outsize.
Outsize.
A woman in outsized glasses.
Outsized clothes.
Outskirts.
Outskirts.
They live on the outskirts of Paris.
Outsmart.
Outsmart.
The older kids outsmart the young ones when trading cards.
Outsold.
Outsold.
Outsourcing.
Outsourcing.
The outsourcing of the marketing to a specialist firm.
Outspend.
Outspend.
In the Senate race, the Republican outspent his rival by nearly $2 million.
Outspoken.
Outspoken.
An outspoken critic of the education reforms.
Outspread.
Outspread.
He was lying on the beach with arms outspread.
A bird with its wings outspread.
Outstanding.
Outstanding.
An outstanding example of a 13th century castle.
An outstanding success.
His performance was outstanding.
We've got quite a few debts still outstanding. An outstanding issue.
The question of who is in charge is of outstanding importance.
Outstandingly.
Outstandingly.
He played outstandingly.
She performed outstandingly well in her examinations.
An outstandingly talented musician.
Outstay.
Outstay.
Outstretched.
Outstretched.
She ran to meet them with outstretched arms.
Outstrip.
Outstrip.
We outstripped all our competitors in sales last year.
Demand for new aircraft production is outstripping supply.
Speeding at 90 miles per hour, Denny outstripped police cars for an hour.
Demand for new aircraft production is outstripping supply.
Speeding at 90 miles per hour, Denny outstripped police cars for an hour.
Outer.
Outer.
I've got to get out of here.
Outtake.
Outtake.
Outtray.
Outtray. Outvote.
Outvote.
France was outvoted on that issue.
Outward.
Outward.
The economy and outward appearance of the area have changed considerably.
His clenched fist was the only outward sign of his anger. His clenched fist was the only outward sign of his anger. His clenched fist was the only outward sign of his anger.
The outward flow of oil.
Outwardly.
Outwardly.
Calvin remained outwardly calm, but inside he was very angry.
Outwardly, at least, he was an optimist.
Outwards.
Outwards.
The door opens outwards. Stand with your elbows pointing outwards.
Outweigh.
Outweigh.
The benefits of the scheme outweigh the disadvantages.
Outwit.
Outwit.
A wolf that had outwitted hunters for years.
Outwork. Outwork. Outworn.
Outworn.
Outworn traditions.
Ouzo.
Ouzo.
Over.
Ova.
The oval.
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 An oval mirror.
Oval office.
Oval office.
Ovarian.
Ovarian.
Ovarian cancer.
Ovary.
Ovary.
Ovation.
Ovation.
The Chancellor's entrance was greeted with a standing ovation.
Fans gave the rock group a thunderous ovation.
Oven-proof.
Oven-proof.
Oven.
Oven.
Preheat the oven to 200 degrees Celsius.
Press the mixture onto the bread and bake in a hot oven for 10 minutes.
Oven ready.
Oven ready.
A 5-pound oven-ready turkey.
Ovenware.
Ovenware.
Over.
Over.
A lamp hung over the table.
She leaned over the desk to answer the phone.
The sign over the door said, "Mind your head."
We watched a helicopter flying low over the harbor. We watched a helicopter flying low over the harbor. We watched a helicopter flying low over the harbor.
Over the body lay a thin white sheet.
She wore a large jacket over her sweater.
Mind you don't spill coffee over my best tablecloth.
Somehow the sheep had jumped over the fence.
The road over the mountains is steep and dangerous. The road over the mountains is steep and dangerous.
A bridge over the River Thames. A bridge over the River Thames.
Their house has a magnificent view over the bay.
There's a bus stop just over the road.
They live over the river in Richmond.
The car plunged over a cliff.
He used to wander over the moors, losing all track of time. He used to wander over the moors, losing all track of time.
They said they had cleaned up, but there were bottles all over the place.
Scientists from all over the world gather here.
I think we're over the worst of the crisis now.
He had a fever last night, but he seems to be over it now.
Sybil has never got over the shock of her mother's death.
I'm over him now.
The Japanese were producing over 100 million tons of steel. Toys suitable for children over the age of 3. Toys suitable for children over the age of 3.
Drivers who go over the speed limit.
A social club for the over 60s.
Will you be home over the summer vacation? Will you be home over the summer vacation?
Over a period of 10 years, he stole £1 million from the company.
Can we talk about this over dinner?
He's having problems over his income tax.
A row over public expenditure.
There is concern over the bad image of the legal profession. There is concern over the bad image of the legal profession.
Genghis ruled over an empire that stretched from Persia across to China. Genghis ruled over an empire that stretched from Persia across to China.
She had great personal influence and power over her followers. She had great personal influence and power over her followers.
Ipswich's 3-1 win over Manchester City. Ipswich's 3-1 win over Manchester City. Can Labour maintain its lead over the Conservatives? Can Labour maintain its lead over the Conservatives?
It has one great advantage over its rivals.
I don't want to talk about this over the telephone.
I heard the news over the radio.
He gets a travel allowance over and above his existing salary. He gets a travel allowance over and above his existing salary. He gets a travel allowance over and above his existing salary. He gets a travel allowance over and above his existing salary.
What? He yelled over the noise of the engine and the wind. What? He yelled over the noise of the engine and the wind.
What is your main reason for choosing one restaurant over another?
He was so drunk he fell over in the road. He was so drunk he fell over in the road. Mind you don't knock the candle over. Mind you don't knock the candle over.
Engineers are working to prevent the tower from toppling over.
As Sheila bent over, a sudden pain shot up her back.
He folded the paper over and put it in his pocket. He folded the paper over and put it in his pocket.
There are only 3 canoes, so some people will have to swim over.
The wall was crumbling where children had climbed over.
I went over to say hello, but Vincent didn't recognize me. We flew over to the U.S. to visit my Aunt Polly.
One of my cousins is coming over from France with his wife and daughter.
Come over here and see what I've found.
Bill lives over on the other side of town. She was standing over by the window.
Do you see that building over there?
You should really come over and see our new house.
I spent the whole day over at Gabby's place.
We could drive over to Oxford this afternoon.
Is the meeting over yet?
I'm so glad the midterm exams are over and done with. You'd better give them the bad news. Do it now. Get it over with.
The bus pulled over to the side of the road.
Would you move over so I can sit next to you? Would you move over so I can sit next to you?
The attacker was ordered to hand over his weapon.
Most of the money has been signed over to his children.
The guards change over at midnight.
We switched over from electricity to gas because it was cheaper.
Turn the box over and open it at that end.
Josh rolled over and went back to sleep. Josh rolled over and went back to sleep.
Almost 40% of women are size 14 or over. People earning £33,000 and over will pay the higher rate of tax. People earning £33,000 and over will pay the higher rate of tax.
She didn't seem overpleased when I asked her to wait.
Perhaps we were all over-enthusiastic about the project.
There should be some money over when I've paid all the bills.
There was a little food left over from the party. Most of the windows have been boarded over.
Parts of the river were iced over.
The door had been painted over with a bright red varnish.
We stood on the roof watching the planes fly over. We stood on the roof watching the planes fly over.
After talking it over with my wife, I've decided to retire.
I'll need time to read the contract over before I sign.
Think it over carefully before you make a decision.
I got mixed up and had to start over.
The way to learn the script is to say it to yourself over and over again.
He sings each song twice over.
The pattern is repeated many times over.
Trade between the 2 countries has increased 5 times over.
Their first plan had gone wrong, so they had to start all over again.
We had quarrelled about the money before, and now it was happening all over again.
I've done my best. Now it's over to the professionals. Are you hearing me loud and clear? Over. The Celtic Church maintained the Greek calendar over and against that of Rome. The Celtic Church maintained the Greek calendar over and against that of Rome. The Celtic Church maintained the Greek calendar over and against that of Rome.
Over.
Over.
Overpopulation.
Overcooked vegetables. Overweight.
Overhanging branches.
Overhead telephone wires.
The overland route.
An overcoat.
We were working overtime.
Overachiever.
Overachiever.
Overact.
Overact.
Overactive.
Overactive.
An overactive thyroid gland.
Such fears are nothing more than the product of an overactive imagination.
Overage.
Overage.
Leighton was overaged for recruitment into the army.
Overall.
Overall.
The overall cost of the exhibition was £400,000.
The overall result is an increase in population.
An overall winner and a runner-up were chosen.
We don't want all the details now, just the overall picture.
Williams came 5th overall.
What will it cost overall?
Overall, prices are still rising.
Overall majority.
Overall majority.
The Conservatives had a huge overall majority in the House of Commons. An overall majority of 28.
Overarching.
Overarching.
The crisis gave an overarching justification to the government's policy.
Overarm.
Overarm.
Overbalance.
Overbalance.
Overawe.
Overawe.
He was overawed by his father.
Overbear.
Overbear.
She is independent-minded enough not to be easily overborne by her husband.
Overbearing.
Overbearing.
A bossy, overbearing wife.
Overbid.
Overbid.
Overbite.
Overbite.
Overblown.
Overblown.
He's not really a scientist, he's just an overblown technician.
Overboard.
Overboard.
One of the crew fell overboard and drowned.
Man overboard.
I hope politicians will not go overboard in trying to control the press.
Overbook.
Overbook.
Overbooked hotels.
Overburden.
Overburden.
Health services have been overburdened and are unable to care for many older people.
A manager overburdened with work.
Overcame.
Overcame.
Overcapacity.
Overcapacity.
Overcast.
Overcast.
A chilly, overcast day.
The sky was overcast and a light rain began to fall.
Overcharge.
Overcharge.
They were being overcharged for cheap beer.
Overcharged. Overcharged.
The stadium's overcharged atmosphere.
Overcoat.
Overcoat.
Overcome.
Overcome.
He struggled to overcome his shyness.
Her financial problems could no longer be overcome.
The engineer was working on the freezer when he was overcome by gas.
Charles was overcome with grief. Australia overcame the Netherlands 2-1.
Overcome. Overcompensate.
Overcompensate.
Zoe overcompensates for her shyness by talking a lot.
Overcook.
Overcook. Overcooked chicken.
Overcrowded.
Overcrowded.
Staff had to work in overcrowded conditions.
Overcrowded housing.
Overcrowding.
Overcrowding.
There are plans to relieve overcrowding in the village.
The prison's chronic overcrowding problem.
Overdeveloped.
Overdeveloped.
An overdeveloped country.
You have an overdeveloped sense of duty.
Overdue.
Overdue.
Analysts believe that worries about the economy are overdone.
Use a few drawings and photographs, but don't overdo it.
You mustn't overdo it. If you're tired, just sit down and start again.
I think I overdid the salt.
Overdone.
Overdone.
The beef was overdone.
Overdose.
Overdose.
A massive overdose of heroin.
She took an overdose and died 2 days later.
An overdose of sun.
She overdosed on sleeping pills.
Overdraft.
Overdraft.
A £250 overdraft.
Many students have a free overdraft facility.
Overdrawn.
Overdrawn.
I try not to go overdrawn if possible.
My account is overdrawn by £300.
Overdressed.
Overdressed.
She felt overdressed in her smart suit.
Overdrive.
Overdrive.
Her career has gone into overdrive.
Overdue.
Overdue.
An overdue gas bill.
The library books are overdue.
The baby was a week overdue.
He was overdue for a shave.
We welcome this announcement and think it's long overdue.
Overeat.
Overeat.
Overegg.
Overegg.
Overemphasize.
Overemphasize.
In the past, the exam had been overemphasized. The importance of adequate preparation cannot be overemphasized.
There has been an overemphasis on content rather than methodology.
Overestimate.
Overestimate.
He tends to overestimate his own abilities.
The importance of training in health and safety cannot be overestimated.
Most patients overestimated how long they had had to wait to see a doctor.
The figure of 30% is clearly an overestimate.
Overexcited.
Overexcited.
Some of the boys became overexcited.
Overexpose.
Overexpose.
Overexposure.
Overexposure.
Overextend.
Overextend.
Be careful not to overextend yourself. You've been very ill.
Jackson's company became overextended financially.
Overfeed.
Overfeed.
Overfill. Overfill.
Overfishing.
Overfishing.
Overflow.
Overflow.
The drains flooded and water overflowed down the main street.
The river had overflowed its banks.
Waste bins overflowing with plastic cups. The garden overflows with colour.
He was overflowing with good ideas. Hospitals were reported to be overflowing with dead and wounded.
The house was full and people were overflowing into the street. The house was full and people were overflowing into the street. My heart was overflowing with gratitude.
One wall was filled to overflowing with books. One wall was filled to overflowing with books. One wall was filled to overflowing with books. The overflow will be accommodated in another hotel. The overflow will be accommodated in another hotel.
The overflow of water from the lake.
Overfly.
Overfly.
Overground.
Overground.
An overground railway.
Overgrown.
Overgrown.
The garden will be overgrown with weeds by the time we get back.
A lawn with overgrown grass.
Stop acting like an overgrown schoolboy.
Overgrowth.
Overgrowth.
Overhand.
Overhand.
Overhang.
Overhang.
We stood under the overhang while it rained.
A 5-foot overhang.
Overhaul.
Overhaul.
A mechanic is coming to overhaul the engine.
All the community's decision-making institutions need to be overhauled.
The car needs a complete overhaul. An overhaul of the tax system.
Overhead.
Overhead.
Bullets whizzed overhead.
A plane flew overhead.
Overhead wires.
Their offices are in London, so the overheads are very high.
Overhead projector.
Overhead projector.
Over here.
Over here.
I overheard part of their conversation.
She overheard the management discussing pay rises.
We overheard the teacher say there would be a pop quiz today.
I couldn't help overhearing your argument. I couldn't help overhearing your argument.
Overheat.
Overheat.
I think the engine's overheating again. Try not to overheat the sauce.
Overheated.
Overheated.
An overheated waiting room.
Her overheated imagination.
Overhung.
Overhung.
Overindulge.
Overindulge.
It's hard not to overindulge at Christmas.
Penny was overindulged by her parents.
Overjoyed.
Overjoyed.
He was overjoyed to see his mother again.
She wasn't exactly overjoyed at the prospect of looking after two small boys. She wasn't exactly overjoyed at the prospect of looking after two small boys.
Her parents were overjoyed that she'd been found alive. Her parents were overjoyed that she'd been found alive.
Overkill.
Overkill.
More television coverage of the election would be overkill. More television coverage of the election would be overkill.
Overladen.
Overladen. Overlaid. Overlaid.
Overland.
Overland.
They planned to travel overland to China.
An overland route.
Overlap.
Overlap. One of Jilly's front teeth overlaps the other.
The tiles on the roof overlap.
Maxwell's responsibilities overlap yours, so you will be sharing some of the work.
The study of sociology overlaps with the study of economics.
Two great men with overlapping interests.
The second phase of development overlaps the first.
My vacation overlaps with yours.
There is considerable overlap between the girls' and boys' test results.
An overlap of about 2 centimetres.
A large degree of overlap.
Overlay.
Overlay.
The wood is overlaid with silver.
The roar of the engines was overlaid by a loud banging. The brass fire surround with its decorative overlay. The brass fire surround with its decorative overlay. The brass fire surround with its decorative overlay.
Sad stories with an overlay of humour.
Overleaf.
Overleaf.
See the diagram over leaf.
Overlie.
Overlie.
Clay overlies chalk in the southern mountains.
Overload.
Overload.
Be careful not to overload the washing machine.
The bus was overloaded with tourists and their luggage.
Don't overload the lighting circuit.
All the staff are overloaded with work.
The modern-day information overload.
An overload of urgent daily business.